Welcome to Eye on the Illini. This is Mike Kegley. I will be on with Mitch Gilfillan. You guys probably remember him. He was the man who got us all the information on the Terrence Shannon Jr. case as it was going on, was tweeting it out, keeping people up to date. And as an attorney, he can provide that perspective as to what is going on from a legal standpoint. On Friday, we recorded this right after we found out that Governor Pritzker signed into law House Bill 307, which goes into effect on January 1st, 2025. And this updates the NIL laws in the state of Illinois. Illinois has been very good about trying to stay on the cutting edge of NIL and to do the best they can for the students and, of course, the universities that are involved. So this is a really, really big deal. And we're going to go into that right after these messages. Mitch Gilfillan is on, and of course, he is the man that many people were introduced to based on his tweets during the Terrence Shannon Jr. case. Of course, he works at the Quinn Johnston law firm, and he's been a real friend of the show as he has helped us understand the legal implications of what were going on in the Terrence Shannon Jr. case. And it is fantastic to have you helping us out as today Governor Pritzker signed into law House Bill 307, which goes into effect on January 1st. And it is basically for lack of a better term, the Illinois NIL law. Is that how you look at it, sir?
Yeah, no, thanks, Mike, for having me. Certainly appreciate you guys and happy to discuss a new evolving topic that continues to change over time in the landscape across the country in this new NIL world that we're living in. And so to answer your question, while this is a new NIL law, it's really stemming from the initial Student Athlete Endorsement Rights Act law that was put into place back in July of 2021. So while I did classify it as a new NIL law, which it is, it's really a bigger part and a global part of the Student Athlete Endorsement Rights Act.
Each state really looks to be putting together their own set of laws, and it seems like that's because Congress has not got involved, and it seems like the NCAA keeps getting beat in court, so they want other people to get involved. And there is certainly a group of state lawmakers that sometimes I look at their rules and I'm not certain if they really want to make it better, but they certainly seem to want to help the schools in their state.
Sure. And since 2021, many states have now adopted laws relating to NIL in order to advance student athlete, compensation, awareness, and really give them their fair, rights as to what their value is worth. That is both on the floor and obviously now out in the community, they're making an impact. And I think that is being felt and resonated across the country. As for Illinois, I was glad to see it was within the first batch of states to really jump on this train. I don't know if it was Florida or Alabama or Arkansas, but they were one of the first states to somewhat start this revolution, and many states have jumped on it. I give Governor Pritzker credit. He's been willing to engage in NIL discussions as opposed to completely block it out or not make it a priority. I certainly think that's an important move for him to really allow student athletes across Illinois to achieve and really what they deserve, their maximum capacity for their NIL value. For some, that's a lot of money. For others, it may not be much, but you and I both know when you're a college kid, student, boy, girl, doesn't matter, any money that you receive is valuable. And so when you're talking in the thousands of dollars to some of these kids, even in the hundreds, that can be life-changing and certainly make an impact on their day-to-day living.
Yeah, that is so important to reiterate because some families, the college education that they get is really because of their scholarship, and there aren't additional funds to help them just lying around. I've always felt like so much of this problem could have been easily resolved if people had had common sense 50, 60 years ago, because guys like Brian Bosworth for Oklahoma, when the 44 jersey was being sold all over the country, couldn't he have gotten $3 to $5 off of each jersey because it wasn't popular before and it hasn't been popular since. The pendulum may swing too far for some people, but when you look at television networks are willing to write billion-dollar checks on an annual basis, the people on the field who are playing, sweating, getting injured, they should be compensated for what they are, which is the draw that makes those TVs turn on and go to those channels.
You're right. It's a long time coming, and this could have been put into place back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. But we're catching up to the times with what amateurism truly is and what professional sports is. And there's no doubt in my mind that collegiate sports, the dominant collegiate sports, which are revenue earning, football and basketball, have reached a level of professionalism. And there's no denying that. The sooner you can embrace that, the sooner off you'll be able to rest easy knowing what is happening and taking place. It's been difficult for college coaches, I think, to adjust to it, but the best college coaches in America, regardless of sport, embrace change. That's one of the founding principles of Coach K back in his day when asked about what type of offense is he going to run. It's premature to determine that based on your personnel. You have to adjust with the times, to adjust with your roster. That goes for the NIL landscape that we're in. And that goes for future litigation down the road as to what could come down with the House settlement or the Johnson v. NCAA case to adjust to those things. And the best coaches don't make excuses, and the athletic directors don't make excuses. They adjust to the times and, in fact, become proactive to tackle the issues that are head on and want to be trailblazers to help make their university better by allowing students to maximize their profit. And I think those are the schools, the coaches, the ADs, the administrators that will excel in the long run, as opposed to being stuck in mud and really gone with the times. You mentioned a couple names, and you're right. Think about what Christian Laettner or Reggie Bush or some of these players could have achieved, or Tim Tebow when they were at these schools. I mean, it's unfathomable how much money these players and student athletes could have earned over time. And it's rewarding as a former student athlete myself to see that money going to student athletes as opposed to big business, big corporations, as you said, making billions with a B off of these student athletes.
Yes, and Illini fans have to go no further back to D. Brown, who was the face of not just the Fighting Illini when they went to the championship game, but he was the face of college basketball, and he would have been a money machine. He deserved probably to make some dollars off of the appeal that he had and the $1 million smile and then what he accomplished on the court when you put that all together.
I agree. And then you take into consideration the value of the Sports Illustrated, pumping the jersey out and other things like that. And just the marketable value of some of these student athletes that have achieved that level of success is just out of, our world, our imagination, what the number could be. But again, change happens over time. Sometimes it's painstakingly slow. And we've obviously arrived at a new age where just compensation will ultimately be rewarded to these student athletes. And you know what? Good for them.
I am totally with you on that. I'm the voice of the fan here at Illini Guys, and we don't have your expertise or education to understand and take these things apart and put them back together. So, can you tell us a little bit about what this law does and then what that will mean to a university such as the University of Illinois?
Sure. So like I said, the law was initially enacted in 2021, and we can just call it the NIL law for simplicity. And so it's been adjusted and changed over time. In 2022, there were changes. In 2023, there were changes, which again, credit to Governor Pritzker for modifying and adjusting with the times. Sometimes the changes are as small as deleting one word. And in fact, 2 years ago, the Senate and the House deleted a word certified as it applied to agents representing student athletes in the state of Illinois. And that word certified was taken out. So these changes can happen in grand scheme as far as paragraphs, or they can be as small as one word additions or to delete. And so the biggest change, that came from this new NIL law that's going into effect this January, which stems from the law in 2021 for me, was some of the issues related to employee status and then the Freedom of Information Act. So let me first start with the employee status. And again, this all came down really this afternoon when Governor Pritzker signed it into legislation and obviously goes into effect here in about 5 months. But to me, uh, you know, employee status with the student athletes across America is still an unknown. There's a case pending right now in the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. It just got shot down today, actually. The timing is incredible. Johnson v. NCAA, the Third District Court of Appeals, issued their mandate today, sending the case back down to the trial court. So you have a district court here, you have an appellate court here, and obviously the last stop is the Supreme Court. And so the Third District Court of Appeals shot the case back down to the district court today to say, no, we need to move forward and do more discovery to find out if these student athletes are in fact employees. So it was a big win, really. And the decision came out back like July 12th, but the mandate came out today, sending it back to the trial court, district court level to determine, are these student athletes employees? And Mike, I'm here to tell you, whether it's in 2026 or 2027, when the ultimate decision comes down, I am confident that student athletes at some point will be deemed employees of their universities. And maybe it doesn't happen that soon, but I do think in the long run that it will. What's interesting about this new adjustment to the NIL law in Illinois is that it essentially disqualifies them from being considered an employee. So it kind of got out in front of it. And again, it could conflict with United States Supreme Court precedent someday, or potential federal legislation someday. But for now, in the state of Illinois, the way the law reads is that actually makes changes concerning their employee status, that they cannot be considered employees at their university. So I think that's a big deal for one. The second thing that I thought was a big deal was the Freedom of Information Act. So as you know, this House settlement, which has been talked about for some time now, and there was a motion to approve it about a week or two ago. That's still set for hearing in September, so there's no finality on that whatsoever. But in the House settlement, they talk about potential disclosures of information to universities or to this public profile, website on the NCAA. But in Illinois here, this law says, and it provides a specified information that includes, reveals, or otherwise relates to the terms of an existing or proposed student athlete publicity rights agreement is exempt from disclosure under the Freedom of Information Act. So that means you, me, or journalist Joey cannot go to the university and file a Freedom of Information Act requesting that private information. That's a big deal. And it's a big deal because once that information goes public, it sets the bar for what the fair market value is of player X at the University of Illinois or SIU Edwardsville or Illinois State. And so that actually, to me, is a huge deal that is not subject to the Foia Act. And so to me, this was a big deal nationwide too, as far as people looking into the University of Illinois and what their athletes could be making.
There's a mood in the country that if somebody's making a lot of money, some people are revered for that, and then other people are just reviled for making a lot of money. By putting that shield there means that the players won't have that, I can yell at him because he makes X amount of dollars, that type of mentality from the fans. I think that's a good thing.
It is, and I do think there will be some conflict with other state laws that maybe do allow it. And so it certainly will be interesting. But I think Illinois is more so looking out for the protection and the privacy of some of these deals to not make it go public, where you're now potentially exploiting student athletes too, or minimizing their contributions if they don't perform to the level that you believe that their contract is worth. And so to me, the exemption from a Foia request is a fairly big deal. Here's the deal with the employee status of student athletes. And again, right now, there's been no federal legislation to deem student athletes employees. Again, I think the Johnson v. NCAA case will ultimately rule on that. You can check back on me within a couple of years. But what this new NIL modification does in the state of Illinois, signed by Governor Pritzker today, it makes changes concerning the compensation of student athletes, while also prohibiting the act from being interpreted to consider these student athletes either employees, agents, or independent contractors of an association, a conference, or a post-secondary school. So what that means is player X that plays soccer or plays baseball at the University of Illinois, by this NIL law, is not deemed to be an independent contractor, an employee, or an agent in any way of the university. Because again, once you trigger employment status, then there's a whole other slew of issues that could come about, whether it's workers' compensation, whether it's insurance issues, If you're an agent of a school, then you're potentially acting on behalf of the school when you do anything, when you're playing a sport or when you're in the community, and that can certainly extend and expose liability in a multitude of ways. And so it strictly limits these student athletes to not be considered those employees or agents.
And then will the school be able to pay the people directly, or is that affected by this law?
Yeah, no, great question there. So this now encourages that the schools are allowed and it's permissible to engage in direct contracts with these student athletes. What it does in some ways is almost attempt to eliminate or minimize the impact of collectives. And you've seen collectives, as University of Illinois has or Bradley University has all over the country, really, start from scratch and build themselves up to be a really strong, outlet for these university teams for their athletes. And so what the universities are trying to do is probably try to limit that booster engagement and keep it more in-house. And as you noticed, universities across the country have hired, in-house NIL advisors or consultants that strictly deal with NIL. You could go to probably 50 to 60 random Power Five universities across the country, and I'd say at least 75% of them have someone designated to the NIL space. And I believe at some point, and I tweeted this out about a year and a half ago, is that I believe at some point most programs internally, sport by sport, will have either GMs or CEOs essentially, operating the day-to-day budgets and the day-to-day, constraints as it comes to NIL activity. And that way coaches can coach, and obviously then they can have an advisor deal with the boosters, alums, et cetera, to help raise and fundraise money.
Are there any other changes in this law that you think are, or any updates to the law that you think are important that will affect the athletes who are looking to go to school at the University of Illinois or any of the other state schools?
Yeah, I thought there was a couple other things that were added. One of them I do think is relevant to the universities, and it was a bone to throw them, is that the new modification provides no post-secondary education institution, which is a college or university, or employee acting within the employee's course and scope of employment at one of these universities is liable for damages related to the ability or inability of a student athlete to earn compensation. So that's a big deal because at some point you could also be the student athlete saying, "Hey, you're not working hard enough for me. You didn't find me the best deal, or my teammate got X amount of money and I only got this." This provides a shield for university employees that they can't be held liable in the NIL space. And I think that's important too, because as a university employee, you would want to do the best you possibly can for those student athletes, but you also don't want to be feeling like you're going to be exposed for personal liability yourself. So that was certainly a big one that was also added.
That's got to be very reassuring for individuals because trying to negotiate these type of things, there's no givens.
You're exactly right. And so I do think that there in time will probably be more NIL modifications to this act, which again, as I mentioned earlier, is known as the Student Athlete Endorsement Rights Act, signed in 2021, and I feel annually gets modified. And that happens with a lot of laws because over time, and you think in 2030, 2040, it could change completely again, or there could be no law at all as it relates to NIL. And here's the number one solution for NIL, and this is across America, is that federal legislation through Congress needs to happen. Sadly, I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon. Obviously, not this year with the presidential election and many other issues that are on the federal docket. But that would ultimately resolve a lot of these issues if the federal government stepped in and they could supersede any state laws as far as conflicts within states and mandate that this is the law, whether they're deemed employees or not, or whether what rights they have or not. This would obviously provide a lot of clarity and I think limit litigation down the road. But time will tell if that ultimately unfolds.
Do you think will the NCAA be looking at these type of laws, and will they use any of what they see in these type of laws when they're trying to affect change in Congress? Do you think anything might be pulled, let's say, from the Illinois law or any other state as part of that solution set? The NCAA doesn't seem to be pushing forward very much of their own right now.
Right, but I also think the NCAA is treading lightly, and it's tough to almost blame them because they're in these uncharted, waters as well. So I absolutely believe the NCAA is monitoring and essentially, overseeing, in their own internal headquarters what's going on across the country. I think they're taking the best ideas that come from universities out west or in the Midwest or in the East and trying to modify it into what is the best NCAA bylaw. Because you got to keep in mind is that the NCAA, body it's while yes, it's a governing body, it also doesn't necessarily have the enforcement and order of court, which is why cases continue to go to court. However, to be a member institution in the NCAA, you have to follow their bylaws. And so it goes both ways until you feel you're unjustly, being, withheld from doing an activity or you're not fairly compensated, as you're seeing play out now in court. So it's not to take a shot at the NCAA. They have their bylaws in place, and the NCAA would say, "Well, you need us too. If you don't want us, then don't be a member." And that's a dangerous road to go down too, because at some point it'd be very, very scary for the NCAA if the Power Five eventually spun off on its own to a super league or a super conference, almost like the European Soccer League, and now all of a sudden you have divisions. And it's been talked about for some time that could be a risk at some point, is that they basically, the Power Five conferences or now the Big Ten and the SEC, maybe the two main power ones, along with the Big 12, say, we're now going to go our own ways. We'll have our own college playoff and people will follow us. And so I still think we're early in the college landscape movement with conferences and where this is all going to end up. But it's going to be an exciting, few years coming up here in the NCAA and all these schools.
Is there anything that Illinois did not do that you think to yourself, well, I would have done X? Was there anything, maybe a stone that they left uncovered, or do you think they did a pretty good job on this?
I give them credit. They did a good job. And the bill was a large part sponsored and advocated by Napoleon Harris, as you may recall, former Harvey Thornton star back in the 90s, played on the best high school team ever to not win a state title with Melvin Ely and Antoine Randall L. They were fantastic back in the 90s, but they ran into Peoria Manual. So certainly give them credit for obviously doing this and driving this. Because here's the thing, is some states are behind the times and they're not modifying their NIL or haven't moved their NIL into a safer space and more clarity for student athletes. It's tough to criticize at this point in the game because I think so many people are moving forward one day at a time, wondering what is allowed and what is permissible, and in some ways testing the own waters to see if it works. So nothing else that I would add from an outside view looking in. I certainly give them credit along with the government, Governor Pritzker, for moving this ahead and giving athletes their fair shake and the profit they deserve.
One final question. Is there anything in the law that could be utilized by, and I'm just using University of Illinois as the flagship, but is there anything they could point to a prospective student athlete and saying, hey, coming to this state means you're going to have this benefit that you might not get in other states that you feel is important, that would be leverageable?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think having a state law that you're not ordered or imposed to disclose, contractual information is obviously important. Arguably you wouldn't want that information out there anyways, because then another school in another state could potentially, minimize your overall value in the transfer market or the portal. So I think that's certainly an added benefit. To not be deemed an employee yet, I think that's just status quo across America. I don't think that's a huge deal. But I certainly think it's advantageous to be in a state where laws are moving in the direction with the times. And so that's the biggest sell. I don't think it's a huge recruiting tool for any coach or administration at this time. But to see changes happening and the state, keeping up with other states is obviously a really good thing.
Excellent. Folks, this was Mitch Gilfillan. Of course, he works with Quinn Johnston Law. He's been a friend of the show, gave us a lot of inside information, and you can go and follow him on Twitter. He is a fascinating read. It's at Mitch, Mitch, and then his last name, which I'm going to spell for you just to make sure, Gilfillan. So go to at Mitch Gilfillan on Twitter. You really need to make sure you're there because I literally get my updates on legal information that pertains to college sports by checking his his Twitter feed. It's just so much easier than actually going to these other places that are much more confusing to deal with. Mitch, thanks so much for coming on today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me. We'll do it again sometime.
And a huge thank you to Mitch Gilfillan for coming on. It was a really a nice thing. He took some time right after this was released to sit down with us and talk about what was going on. That type of courtesy is fantastic. Thanks so much to Mitch. Of course, he works at Quinn Johnston Law, fantastic firm as well. We wanted to also let you know if you're looking for the type of background information that's more than just Illini sports, but give you this type of discussion, IlliniGuys.com, $99 a year. It is a great place to be. And you can go on, and we have our message boards that has all sorts of information on basketball and football, recruiting, other things such as what's going on here as well. It is a fantastic community. We'd love to have people join, and it's just about football time. So this would be a great time to do that. Until next time, go Illini.